System of white supremacy, just like in America, they build in Israel. Why? And I can tell you why. Because the true Jews, according to the Bible, you can check it in the Bible, you can read Job 30:30 and some other places. They have never been white. They have been people of color. And they have not stopped in Ethiopia. They were in Ethiopia, Sudan, and they have settled in West Africa. From West Africa, they have been taken as slaves to America. Brothers and sisters, blacks of America, it's you. You are the true Hebrews.
The scripture tells us we caught the most hell out of every nation under heaven. So our punishment is almost up. So we ain't gonna catch hell no more. We're gonna enjoy this kingdom we're about to get, brothers. We're gonna enjoy this kingdom.
It's gonna be an everlasting kingdom.
And you're gonna have imagine having fresh food every day.
Imagine having fresh meat every day.
Fresh meat every day, fresh garments, a chariot or many chariots.
What's that in Esther?
Yeah.
The woman they're gonna prepare, it's gonna take them a year.
Yep.
You ain't just gonna have a woman and go home with the woman and have sex.
Yep.
She's gonna have to prepare herself
for you.
And that's gonna take a year.
Yep. And like the scene in the movie Coming to America. The scene where Eddie Murphy was in the water and the chick said the royal penis is clean, sir.
That's just that's an inkling, man. Right? That's an inkling of what we're gonna get.
Yeah. You know, have one woman wash your penis, have another woman get it. That's the kind of kick, man. Hey, Isaiah 64 and 4.
Close to music, sir. White
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
But over who actually was a Jew.
In their articles on Khazars, the Jewish encyclopedias tell us that in the 8th century AD, Jewish missionaries ventured north of Babylon to the land of the Khazars between the Caspian and the Black Seas. Khazaria was a vast grassland on what is now the plains of southern Russia, inhabited by a race of merchants, artisans, and warriors of Hunnish Turkish stock. About 740 AD, the king of the Khazars converted to Judaism and made it the state religion. Incredibly, within a few centuries, the people of Khazaria convinced themselves that they were not Gentiles after all, but the physical descendants of Abraham. Thus, by the 10th century AD, a nation of proselyte Jews thrived in what is now central Russia. During the Middle Ages, the fierce Mongols from the east and Russians from the north drove the Khazars west out of their ancient homeland. Most settled in Eastern Europe, especially Poland, where they established communities of artisans and traders.
Its tribal roots. It's one of the few religions, other than, let's say, Zoroastrianism, which is really a tribal religion still. It's beyond faith and culture. It's based on ancestry. It's a blood religion. Many Jews say with no contradiction, I'm an atheist Jew or an agnostic Jew. No other religion can make that claim. What Jesus did is turn the symbol of blood meaning ancestry, into faith. It was literally a dramatic change in the way we viewed religion, and it also had a change in the genome and how we understand both genetic anthropology and genetic genealogy. Now, we've all heard the phrase, we are, regardless of race, 99.9% the same. That was the common refrain when the Human Genome Project, the crude map of it, was revealed in the year 2000. President Clinton said it. Others repeated it. There are articles in the New York Times saying it. That's a meaningless statement. It's statistical mumbo-jumbo. First of all, we know now it's not 99.9%, but it's actually 99.7%. But even more important, that 0.3% is the difference between men and women. It's the difference between why you're short and why you're tall. It's the difference between the color of one's skin. It's the difference between why 494 of the top 500 times in the 100 meters are won by people of West African ancestry, and whites, Asians, and East African Kenyans are terrible at the 100 meters. That's not because of culture. It's not because of the food that they eat. It's because of how genetics has shaped our ancestry. There are different groups. There are different population groups. And Jews are one of the subgroups that have become the favorites of geneticists to study, because despite the fact that we've lived in separate populations all around the world, very disparate populations, pockets of populations, Jews have remained incredibly insular within those communities. The rate of Jewish outmarriage up until mid-century of last century was less than 0.5%. Absolutely remarkable. No other group, no other minority group or majority group has that kind of genetic solidarity. I wanted to give you some idea from a macro level, talking about population in general, how we trace ancestors with DNA. I mentioned to you that I had a breast cancer gene, which is common only among Jews. In fact, there are many diseases that are common only among Jews. The breast cancer genes are found in what are called the autosomal DNA. And the autosomal DNA is very difficult to find because it's so scattered throughout the human genome, and there's no real way to trace it. When a few years from now, maybe even a decade or two from now, we'll be much, much better, and we'll have the genetic equipment and the mathematical equations to do analysis of human beings by taking their entire human genome and understand what our genetic heritage is that make up who we are. As of now, we can only track just 2 lines of our DNA, 2 lines of millions of lines of DNA that make up who we are. One is the Y chromosomal DNA, which is passed down intact in men, and the other is mitochondrial DNA that is passed down from woman to woman. We all have mitochondrial DNA. It's in every single cell, but men do not pass it on to our offspring. It's only passed on from woman to woman. So if I had my mitochondrial DNA tested, it would test my female line all the way back to the first genetic Eve. But if my daughter wanted to test it, she would not be able to track my family's maternal DNA. So the maternal DNA and mitochondria is only passed down from woman to woman. The male DNA Y is passed down from men to men. And
Judaism thus became divided into 2 basic groups which remain today: the Ashkenazim, which are the Khazars of the East, and the Sephardic Oriental, which are Jews of Spain, Turkey, and lands bordering on the Mediterranean. Today, the Ashkenazim, or Khazars, are the vast majority, about 80% of those who call themselves Jews. The 2 most recent premiers of Israel illustrate these 2 racial types. Shimon.
Now, he said earlier, John 14, I go to prepare a place for you, right? 2,000 years. Now, that's Solomon that took 14 years to build that majestic house. So if he's taking 2,000 years to build us a place, we're going to be living. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be living. That's right, man. That's right. Another thing, when we go on the ship, we're not going to go on the ship like George Jetson, man. When you jump, you hop in the ship and a little small-ass ship. Your ship is going to be as big as a daggone city. That's right, man. And you ain't going to have CDs. You're going to have actual orchestras playing in your ship. They showed you that in Star Wars with this guy.
Rabbi A.B. Finkelstein of New York, that we both have 2 fathers, and so that's why we look at the world in 2 different ways.
And we know that there's a massive collision that's going to take place between 2 forces, don't we?
Well, that's what your book says. Our book says that we're going to take over the world.
Well, I look at you...
You're doing a pretty good job right now.
Yes, you've done a pretty good job, but there's quite an awakening coming, and My father, who's not your father, my father Yahweh, who isn't your father, of course your father is talked about by my father in John 8:44, stating that your father was Satan and that you're the descendant of Cain, who was the first murderer. And you know that's true because you teach it in your synagogue.
Well, that's true, but it's not for you Goyim to know. But right now it's too late. It's over for you white race. So that's why I'm speaking so honestly here, to bring it out into the open so that you can see it for what it is. You've been teaching the people real good, but they don't wake up, do they?
If you want to live under the water for a month, you live under the water for a month. Then we'll be able to talk to the animals. You know, tell the fish, how you doing today? I'm doing good. How are you doing?
For Gentiles who feel Jewish, it's all about blood.
Have you ever felt like you were Jewish and wondered why? Discover how you can unlock the mystery of your family heritage to find out if you have Jewish blood. Today on Jewish Voice.
One of the questions that I'm asked by Christians who love Jewish people in Israel is, how can I find out if I'm Jewish? I just feel so Jewish.
This gives you an idea of the kind of tests that are done. Most of the testing that you will see at family tree DNA and elsewhere is mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomal DNA. Autosomal DNA gives you an idea, much more vague, about your general heritage. What percentage of your DNA may be Native American? What percentage of your DNA may be European? And it's done through mathematical models, and it's not very exact, but it is something that over time will become the future, I think, of a lot of DNA research. Very quickly, this is the human migration map. This has nothing to do with Judaism per se, but this is the human migration maps of the Y chromosome. You can track it because, again, the Y chromosome stays intact. The first male that we've been able to genetically track would be found here in Africa, and you can see some of the African roots, some of the African tree branches stayed in Africa, but there was a movement out of Africa, and that's essentially the movement out of Africa that occurred 40 or 50,000 years ago. Then all those branches are various genetic lines that can be tracked now through Y chromosomal tracking. What's so interesting about the Israelites and later the Jews is that they were a Middle Eastern culture. We know, for instance, that you can look back at the Jewish diaspora in the early Christian era. In 1 century CE, Jews were mostly concentrated in the Middle East around what is now Israel and Palestine. By the 4th century, they had begun to spread to places like North Africa, already spreading into Spain, the Alsace and areas in France that became partly the core of Sephardic Jewry and partly the early elements of Ashkenazi Jewry. By the 6th and 8th century, the largest Jewish community was actually in Rome. And scientists now believe that the Roman Jews contributed most of the DNA to what became Ashkenazi Jewry. A lot of the lords of the nobility of France and some of the German regions in the 9th, 10th, 11th century, because of Christian taboos against money lending and other things, called on Jews, Jewish traders and others to come to Europe to act as middlemen, to act as tax collectors. That brought a lot of small communities of Jews into that area, and eventually they became the core area of Judaism, and ended ultimately through persecutions, the Crusades and elsewhere, ended up pushing gradually through Central Europe into Eastern Europe, and became the core of Ashkenazi Jewry. It's interesting, from maybe the year 1000 to the 15th century, even into the 16th century, the Jewish population, the Ashkenazi Jewish population, rarely was much larger than 25 to 50,000 Jews. The majority of Jews were Sephardic Jews. That was the center of Jewish civilization. It was quite sophisticated. The Jewish population was quite small. And one of the reasons that we see a lot of Jewish diseases and a lot of Jewish mutations, one of the reasons we can do this kind of DNA tracking is because that population was so small and we have so few original lineages that track to, which make it actually a gold mine again for scientists to track. But the explosion of the Jewish population, the Ashkenazi Jewish population, really didn't begin until the 15th and into the 16th centuries. And it was quite bumpy because of various massacres and pogroms and so forth.
You think you're God. The word Lucifer there means light bearer, Illuminati, because of luminary ones, the enlightened ones. When we're the children of light, you're the children of darkness. That's why you do the things you do. You Rothschild's elites that rule the planet Earth. You're the Edomites in the Bible. You're Esau. And we're Jacob. And the earth is in turmoil because the righteous is not ruling. Like you just had that North Dakota, the bison, the buffaloes that showed up to back up Gad. That was a sign from the Most High, the Great Spirit. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit, as slavery for you devils. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? I'll read that again. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. So you actually going to go under the earth, man. You gave us projects, reservations, barrios, reservations, hoods, ghettos, right? But in our kingdom, you actually, since you love destroying the earth so much, guess what? The earth is going to get revenge too. You're going to actually be in pits, man. We're going to actually dig up holes, giant holes.
It has been deleted, your history. You don't know who you are. Don't forget about it. This is why America has been taking your history away. Never to find out that it's all about you. I'm telling you this, please. I don't ask you to come to Israel and to start a revolution. I'm just asking you to start thinking this way. To believe me a little bit. Because I'm living in Israel and I'm part of this injustice. I really believe that people like me and you, we can bring the justice back.
Look at my African American over here.
What did you guys discuss in your meeting?
Look at him. Are you the greatest? You know what I'm talking about? Look at my African American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest? You know what I'm talking about?
I just want to take a picture right now.
Okay.
For a long time. Life. We discussed it.
Money in 2020. Do you think that's something you still want to do in light of this meeting? Kanye, are you considering performing at the inauguration? Kanye, no comment about your meeting with the president-elect. This is the president-elect of the United States. Nothing to say?
I just want to take a picture right now.
Do you wish you had voted for him, Kanye?
So long, man. You take care of yourself. I'll see you soon. All right?
2,000 years of Jewish hatred of Jesus Christ. Could a genetic code be in place that
the wisdom of Solomon in the Apocrypha in the 5th chapter talks about how Jacob, how the heathen is going to be amazed and confounded when they realize that the so-called black man is that chosen line. You know, in the 5th chapter, I'm getting ready to read some verses here. You know, it's going to be amazing. You aren't going to be able to comprehend it, and you're going to be in anguish and dismay and shock. How could it be that this so-called black man who's been terrorized over here for 400 years and all over the earth, really, in the four corners of the earth, how could it be?
You don't get a lot of followers, do they? Because you know why? They're scared of us Jews. Because they don't want to be called anti-Semites. And they believe that we're the chosen people. And so that's why we can do whatever we want to do and we can get away with it because the white men are cowards. And we go to the synagogue all the time and have some Manischewitz and dance the Hava Nagila.
That stretched out through that time. As you can see, we've done, this is just a chart of some of the Y test, the Y chromosomes, and you can really do see that Jews, that there are different populations. You can see the yellow grouping over here. Those are the African populations, very much separate genetically from the others. You can see the little circle down where it says EGY, Egypt, Tunisia, Ethiopia. They represent a very coherent genetic group. You can see Ashkenazis, which is right, that kind of pinkish orange one, or right on the line on the right side. Very similar to Syrians, a little bit to Turks, Romans, Kurds, and so forth. But again, this is only the Y chromosomal line. This is only the male line. We do believe that, for all intents and purposes, Jews came, Ys, the males of Jews, pretty much came from a Semitic background. What was popular in the 1960s was Arthur Kessler's book, The 13th Tribe. You got to remember, coming out of World War II, there was a lot of concern about talking about racial separateness, talking about racial specialness. Jews were particularly sensitive to it. They abandoned the notion of race.
But the reason there's so many gay people now is because it's a chemical warfare operation. I have the government documents where they said they're going to encourage homosexuality with chemicals so that people don't have children.
All right, you so-called white women, you know your man like to dress like women. You know that. You know that. Every now and then you white boys, you like to put on them broad panties. You know that. Keep it real, man. Come on now, keep it real. That's why they ain't say nothing.
Keep it real.
See, we bold, man. We got you crackers, man. The scriptures got you.
That's right.
Go ahead. Right, it says, they're like the deaf adder that stopped for air, which will not hearken to the voice of charmers. Which will not hearken to, we're the charmers. And we're coming with this word. We're charming. Like a snake when they play that music, the snake comes up and starts dancing. Really, we're the real snakes, but we're snakes in righteousness. And Yahweh Shai was known as the brass serpent. All right? Because Yahweh Shai was the real snake. Scripture said, be wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. So we're the real snakes. You see how we were charming that devil? We were charming him, man. He wanted us to get...
I just want to congratulate the other candidates.
There's nothing easy about running for president, I can tell you.
It's tough, it's nasty, it's mean, it's vicious, it's beautiful.
Here from day one, we used to wake up and, damn, pause, but like, check this out. Back in the days when he was like 10 and I was a little bit older, his older brother, we used to fight over the frosted.
Faggot ass nigga Will Smith.
I'm going to prove to you tonight that you have physically descended from Israel. You say, I'm black. I'll prove it to you.
With Gay Z. You see what I'm saying? Look at Snoop Frog. They got him. The niggas holding the purse. $64,000 purse right.
Gay, 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 gay. Well, he extends that, as you mentioned, Maya, to Judea and Samaria, which he says is the land of our ancestors, where Abraham and David and so on walked. This is indeed an articulation of the claim to Eretz Israel as set forth in 1947 by Rabbi Fishman when he presented a formal map to the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, when the Jewish Agency was advancing its proposition as to what constituted Eretz Israel, or the land of Israel.
Well, it went further than Judea and Samaria, Ralph. It goes to...
They produced a map, as we've often discussed on Taking Aim, based upon the second volume of Theodor Herzl's historic work on the Zionist project. And the map, I believe it's on page 731 of volume 2, sets forth unmistakably and clearly what do these people, and that includes Benjamin Netanyahu, what do they mean by Eretz Israel, or the land of Israel? All of Palestine, all of Cisjordan, all of Lebanon, 2/3 of Iraq, 1/2 of Syria, the southern tier of Turkey, 1/3 of Arabia, Egypt up to the Nile, including Cairo, indeed, even Kuwait. There is a very...
Lebanon up to the Litani.
No, not all of Lebanon, Maya.
Ah.
The map includes all of Lebanon, as I mentioned, 1/2 of Syria, 2/3 of Iraq, southern tier of Turkey, Cisjordan. It is indeed a region which is considered by the Zionists from their inception to be the project. And every spokesperson has articulated the view that these questions of what constitutes the land are on a timetable, and the Palestinians are usurpers. They have no historic relation to this land. They are simply a remnant, opportunist, nomadic tribal presence who have intruded themselves upon Eretz Israel. And what's extraordinary about this, of course, is that Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu is descended from people who have no relation to Palestine, historic or other, because Ashkenazim or European Jews, such as Mr. Netanyahu or ourselves for that matter, are in fact descendants of the Khazars, a 8th and 9th century empire that converted to Judaism at the time, from which European Jews are descended. Indeed, as I've often discussed, if one wanted any, as it were, scientific data which demonstrates the ethnic origins of European Jewry, for what the hell it matters, apropos the question of Palestine, but here's the point. European Jews are susceptible to a genetic condition known as Tay-Sachs disease, analogous to what African Americans suffer with
sickle cell anemia.
Sickle cell anemia. What's interesting about this is that only European Jews are susceptible to this genetic trait. No Semitic people is. That means none of the Jews from the Arab East, the Mizrahim.
From Yemen or from Iraq.
Yemen or Iraq or North Africa or any of the areas of the region, because like their Arab brothers and sisters, who are, as are the Arab Jews,
the Palestinians would be converts to Islam.
Well, the point is very ironic, as we've often made it, and I think we should take just this brief moment to emphasize this. Who do you think was converted to the proselytizing and dynamic Islamic religion in the 6th century? The indigenous inhabitants. They were Jews. They were non-believers. They were Zoroastrians. They were people of various local religious and other views, animist views. The irony of all this is that the Palestinian people have a greater genetic link to the Jews of the region by descent than the Ashkenazim, who have no relation to this region whatsoever. So this is essentially a racist and pseudoscientific attempt historically to lay claim to an area and to translate their God into a real estate agent. This belongs to you, and this belongs to you, and da-da-da-da-da. There is no remote scintilla of evidence to establish a relationship between Jews in the world today and this region. None whatsoever, because the Jews of the period were expelled to Babylonia, and the remaining tribes were entirely assimilated to the populations of the area. And indeed, they are the antecedents of the Palestinian population. They have a greater relationship to the Hebrews of the early period than any Ashkenazim, who is none whatsoever, by way of punctuating the irony and the point about the nature of a colonial settler project as an instrument of imperial conquest and nothing
even more aggressively, rejected even more aggressively than other cultures. Arthur Koestler was part of that liberal population that was even quite critical of the state of Israel. You got to remember that Reform Judaism was very hostile to the Zionist state for many, many years because they thought it was underscoring the sense of Jewish separateness. It really didn't resonate with them. And Koestler put out this book which really confirmed the politically correct prejudice of the era, which was that Jews were converted from Khazars. The Khazarian population, and there's some interesting evidence, including coins and extra biblical. Obviously, the Bible is well past the Bible, that shows there was a time when the nobility of the Khazars did convert to Judaism in the 8th and 9th century. But the general belief by Koestler that he was pushing was that everybody in the kingdom converted, which is in fact not true. This is Khazari in the 7th and 10th centuries, and like I said, it was the Jewish population. Probably there were some seminal Jews that had come up from the Middle East. There were also Jews that had come up from Rome and ultimately moved through and pushed over to the Khazarian Empire when some of the Mongols and other tribes were very active in Europe. But the Khazarian conversion was very much limited to the nobility. And in fact, we now have some DNA testing which confirms that, although how many people here know what a Kohanim is, know the whole story of the Kohanim? Okay, so you're familiar with the Jewish priesthood, which we will talk about. So you know there's also Levites, the junior priests, I like to call them. The Levites actually have a very high percentage of Khazarian genes. It ends up, one of the speculations, and it's pretty informed speculations, Karl Skoretsky, who was very involved in the Kohanim research is one of the believers in this theory. The Khazarians couldn't buy their way into the Jewish priesthood, which they would love to have done because they were noble. They thought they should rightly be Jewish priests, shouldn't they? They couldn't do that, but they could buy themselves into the Levite priesthood. So there's a belief that many of the Khazarian nobles who did convert became Levites, and that's one of the reasons that there's such a high, odd percentage of Khazarian DNA ancestry in Levites, but not found in other Jewish populations. So there clearly is a component of Khazarian Jewry, but it's quite small, 5 to 10%, and it clearly doesn't fit the Kessler kind of Jew-hating, I hate to put it in those terms, but that's really what it was, Jew-denying model that suggests that we are not descendants from Jews from the Middle East. And of course, that was in the political context of feeling guilty about the Jews, European Jews going to Israel and competing with Palestinians and others over the issue of the right of return. So ultimately, Jews developed into 3 major genetic groupings. There's the Middle Eastern Jews, the Jews who stayed in Babylon, who remained in the Middle East, Iranian Jews, Iraqi Jews, and so forth, and ultimately fled, I think, to Israel when Israel was created, are the smallest numbers of Jews. Sephardic Jews, which was the center of world Jewry from the 7th century until the Holy Inquisition, really, numbered well over 1 million. You have some very, very well-known Jews from that period, Jewish intellectuals, and there was an era in the 11th and 12th centuries called the Ornament of History, when Jews, Muslims, and Christians actually got along very, very well, relatively speaking. And then there's the Ashkenazi Jews, represented quite small, went through a number of what are called genetic bottlenecks, where their population maybe went from 25 to 100,000, then shrunk during the Crusades or the various massacres back down to 20,000. And it's during that period that the core of Jewish ancestry was formed. As for the female DNA, this is interesting. I have a startling statement to make, which may be that none of you here who are Ashkenazi Jews may be under the laws of Israel Jewish. That is true by DNA, and this is going to present some fascinating theological problems. The reality of it is that most of female DNA that they've done testing of traces back to European populations. Whether they were pagan or Christian, it's not clear, but they almost certainly were not Semitic. There is a sizable percentage of DNA on the female side that does trace back to the Middle East, but the majority of it traces back to Europe and seems to indicate that the pattern of Jewish communities, Ashkenazi Jewish communities, was traders or middlemen, nobility aides, whatever, either brought up by the aristocracy or who wandered there because there was a sense of opportunity during brief periods of openness, and they took on local wives. Now, if they went through a formal conversion process, and that's your genetic line, you are Jewish under Israeli law. If they didn't, if they just took a local woman as their wife, and that local woman was pagan or Christian, they didn't go through a formal conversion process, if the rabbis of Israel find out about it, you have a little bit of a problem. The reality of it is that most of us today who are Ashkenazi are probably the descendant of a Semitic Jewish male and either a convert or a Christian or pagan who didn't convert, but quickly was assimilated into the small but soon growing Jewish community, raised their children as Jews, but if you ultimately trace it back, they're not so Jewish.
Got that one saying that the truth hurts, man. Well, this word is a double-edged sword, man. So guys, their true spirit is showing, man. But hey, man, forget these guys. We just gotta stay in the spirit. We gotta pray. If need be, fast. I mean, I'm speaking for myself also, you know. First and foremost for myself. But this is what we all need to do, man. To stay in the spirit, man, because guys want to sidetrack you, man. These guys don't know whether they're coming or going, man. Ignore these scoffers. We in the end, man. I want to give all praise to Yahweh Bashim Yahushua. Double honor to the apostles, the elders, great millstone. Peace and blessings to the hopeful elect. Shalom.